talking about the idea of being aware of the presence of Hashem, starting from the beginning of chapter 41, and developing the innate fear of Hashem that every Jew has inside of their heart, not to rebel, meaning not to sin, not to go against Hashem in any way, shape, or form. So according to this interpretation, of course, according to this understanding, that means that whenever we do an Avera, whenever we sin, we are actually going against our internal Jewish nature. How do you like that? It's an interesting way of looking at it. The Alter Rebbe says that we have internally we get our neshama from the forefathers and the foremothers, and part of that means that we have an innate fear of Hashem, not to go against what Hashem wants.
Against Jews, what?
The challenge, of course, is how to bring that to the fore. Right? So we get the we get the innate fear from the forefathers, the foremothers, but how do we bring it to the fore, right? How do we bring it to our actual realization? And the Rebbe spoke about meditating upon the greatness of Hashem and the Malchus of Hashem, and realizing that God's light encompasses all worlds and fills all worlds. We're talking about a whole system of divine light to bring everything about and ultimately to relate to everything. And you have all of these high level, this whole level of spiritual, this whole spiritual hierarchy. And of course, we know we have higher spiritual worlds, higher upon higher, beyond our imagination. Nevertheless, Hashem pushes away all of these higher and lower lights, all of these higher and lower levels, and he designates his Malchus, his being the Melech, the king, and thus the creator, and thus the life giver of all of the entire universe. He designates this Malchus upon the people, Israel, generally speaking, but specifically upon me. Every person has to say that it's specifically upon me, because Bishvili Nivra Ha'olam, the world was created for me. So we need to sense that God brought all of this about for me. That's an awesome thing to ponder. And of course, it's never going to lead to any arrogance, because it's a great responsibility. If everything was brought into existence for me to bring God's light into the world, well, I've got quite a responsibility here. I better get cracking. There's no time for arrogance. Arrogance really takes up a lot of time is wasted on arrogance. And then we meditated upon the idea that God is standing upon us and searching inside to see if we are fitting him kara'ui, as is fitting, right? And as we spoke about last week, fitting for the situation. Every situation is going to be different. And so for this situation, we need to be bringing the awareness of God into this situation. And this is, like I've been mentioning the past few weeks, this is the concept of Yiras Shamayim that we hear about, literally translated as the fear of heaven. But what it means is acting as if Hashem is standing upon us at this moment, as if the King of all kings is right here, right now, with us, observing us, and waiting for us to serve him. Now, I use the word as if, right? And that of course, can be easily misconstrued. I say we have to act as if Hashem is standing upon. Well, one second, isn't Hashem really standing upon us? Yeah, of course he is, but that's not our reality. So we have to use our imagination, not to think of something that's imaginary, But sometimes we have to use our imagination to think of that which is real. When we deal with our children, or we deal with our spouse, or we deal with our community, we get caught up in small things. Maybe you don't, I do. It's human nature, we get caught up in small things. But the community and being part of a community is so much greater. Our spouse and our relationship to our spouse is so much greater, and our relationship to our child is so much greater. But unfortunately, that so much greater is not part of our present understanding. So we need to use our imagination, not to imagine something that's imaginary, but really to imagine the true reality. Right? And that's why I use the word as if. We have to act as if Hashem is standing here, not because Hashem isn't here, but because that's not our reality. So we have to imagine, we have to use our imagination to imagine that which truly is. And then the Rebbe started to discuss what happens, right? This is all any ordinary Tuesday or Thursday. But what about when you happen to be doing a mitzvah? What is happening then? Well, when you're doing a mitzvah, or when you are reading the words of prayer or studying Torah. So you have different things happening here. You have either an idea, God's idea. What do we call God's ideas? Torah, right? It's God's will, it's God's wisdom, right? So it's God's ideas. So it's his wisdom. The divine wisdom is Torah. Then we have the way that that divine wisdom becomes manifest in the words of our prayer, the words of speech when we speak the words of Torah. Then we have the actions of a mitzvah. So that is the manifestation of the divine will. So when we do the mitzvah, we are actually creating the mitzvah. The mitzvah does not exist until we do it. So we do not make a bracha on building a sukkah, because we're not yet doing the mitzvah. The mitzvah is to dwell inside of the sukkah. And when we go to dwell in the sukkah, we are now creating the mitzvah. We think we're creating the mitzvah when we're building the beams and putting all the stuff on top, and that's all of the hard work. That's true. Especially if you're a Jewish guy, it's like, what? This is a hammer? Which end do I hit with? But we're actually creating the mitzvah when we fulfill it, right? It says, "Va'asisem otam," you shall perform them. But another way of understanding "va'asitem otam" is you shall create them, you shall make them. How do you make the mitzvah? By performing it. It now comes into existence. So without you doing it, it's not a mitzvah, is it? So we are manifesting the divine will into the world through the doing, through the action of the mitzvah. So through Torah, through prayer, through the mitzvah, we now become a conduit for this infinite light of God that comes into the world. And our soul is totally aware of this. Our soul knows what's going on. Our soul is like, wow, can't believe it. Our body might not be so blown away. Our body might even be not so much into it. But if I go to a Jewish fellow in the street and I ask him, "Excuse me, sir, will you put on tefillin?" He says, I said, "If you do it, it'll really make me happy. It'll make my day." So why is he doing the mitzvah? Is he doing it for God, or is he doing it for me? He thinks he's doing it for me, but his neshama knows better. Right? Any mitzvah that a Jewish person does is really the fulfillment of God's will. And his neshama is basking in the infinite light of Hashem. If he was connected with his neshama, with his soul at that point, his life would become transformed. So what's the problem? Why isn't that happening? Not because it's not happening. The disconnect is between his conscious mind and the mind of his soul. So his conscious mind is not connected to the mind of his soul, so he's not aware of what is happening. Sometimes you'll do a mitzvah with a person. Sometimes I'll give Shabbat candles to a woman, and she'll talk to me, and she'll call me after during the week and tell me about how it just totally transformed her house. It was amazing.
Rabbi,
Yes.
a quick question. In the case of tefillin, you make a bracha shel yad before you make shel rosh, obviously, but the mitzvah isn't really consummated until you make both brachas. So what is the condition before you make the bracha on shel rosh?
Well, first of all, in the Chabad tradition, we only make one bracha. Okay, as well as I think Sephardim also only make one bracha. Ashkenazim make two brachas. Why do Ashkenazim make two brachas? Because it's written that ukshartam laot al yadecha, tying it as a sign on your arm, and it being as a remembrance between your eyes, are two different actions, two separate mitzvot that require two separate blessings. So actually, if you're making two separate blessings, you are underscoring even more so that they're two independent mitzvot. What if, God forbid, a person, can't put on the arm tefillin or can't put on the head tefillin? Do they put on the other one? The answer is yes, they do, because each mitzvah is independent.
Okay, so in that respect, it's not in conflict with the idea of building a sukkah and not making a bracha until you do leishay b'sukkah. Okay, I understand. Thank you, Rabbi.
So now the Rebbe is going to continue on, and we're now going to dissect a little bit the mitzvah of tefillin, and the Rebbe is going to go into some of the details. There we are, tefillin. So when we take a look at the tefillin, we see the tefillin shel rosh. If you look here, you'll see it has 4 different compartments. So for many of you, this might be clear and obvious. I'm not sure what everyone's knowledge is, but in the tefillin shel rosh, you have 1, 2. Whoops. Sorry, I clicked when I didn't mean to click. Here we go. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4. Yes? 4 compartments. Those are 4 different pieces of leather, and each one is its own independent compartment. And inside of that goes one of the 4 parchments of the Torah. Right? The parchments of the Torah are, you can't really read them here, but there are 4 places in the Torah where it says that you shall put it on your arm and on your head. So there are 4 different parchments, and in the head tefillin, those are rolled up and, kind of rolled up and flattened, and then stuck into each of the compartments. And the hand tefillin, the arm tefillin, right? So there's one compartment. So the 4 parchments are written on one long strip that's rolled up, like a Torah scroll, but a really tiny Torah scroll, okay? And they're all put into the one box of the arm tefillin. And that is the fulfillment when you take these words and you bind them on your arm and you place them upon your head. You are fulfilling what the verse says, and you shall tie them upon your arm, right? These words you shall tie upon your arm. How do you tie words on your arm? Well, we figured out a way. By gosh, we figured out a way to tie these words on our arm. We take the words and we write them on a parchment akin to the Torah scroll, right? And we take these words and we put them in the tefillin and we bind them on our arm. And now the Alter Rebbe is going to explain Kabbalistically. He's going to go into, hopefully I'm going to be able to spell this out over here. So there are 4 chapters, and I'm going to show it with the head tefillin, because in the head tefillin you see clearly there's 4, right? So let me try to write this out. So we have, you're familiar with Chochmah is the divine level of, the first level of knowledge. Then we have Bina, which is the divine level of understanding. Then we have Da'at. Da'at means taking that wisdom and information and now beginning to make it real to yourself so that ultimately you can feel it. And therefore, what the Alter Rebbe is going to explain is that Da'at is going to split into love and fear. And these all correspond, this corresponds to the divine system of the Sfirot of Chachma, Bina, and Da'at. And how do we end up with four different boxes? Because they are Chachma is going to be box number 1. Bina is going to be box number 2, parchment number 2, and they correspond to the parshiot in the tefillin. So the tefillin says the first section is Kadesh li kol bechor, sanctify for me. So the level of Kodesh kabbalistically is associated with Chachma because it's high and removed. We're not going to go into the details here. You'll have to take my word for it. And the second parchment is associated with the level of Bina, with understanding. And then the third parchment is connected with love, which is, again, an offshoot of Da'at, right? How do we know the third parchment? We all know. And you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might, right? So that's clearly love of God. And then the fourth parchment is, it'll be if you keep all of these commandments and you don't veer, right? And it's basically about what we've been talking about, a fear of God, meaning being aware of God so that we don't mess up, so that we don't sin. That's the fourth parchment of the Shema. So basically, the love and fear are components, offshoots of the Da'at. And thus we have the 4 chapters of Tefillin. Okay, so these are the 4 chapters of Tefillin. And now the remarkable thing that the Alter Rebbe will be sharing with us over here. Let me get rid of this. Got too many boxes open. Okay. I'll manage it. All right. So the point that, do you see the file folder open in front of you?
No.
Okay, that's good. Okay, so the amazing point that the Alter Rebbe is making over here is that when we do the mitzvah of tefillin, we become totally nullified to the Chachma, Bina, and Da'at of God, to the divine level of intellect, as it ultimately leads to our emotions. So our intellect and emotions become totally subservient to the divine. We become a conduit for these spiritual levels when we put on the tefillin. This is what the Alter Rebbe is explaining. And now we're going to see it, we're going to understand it a little bit more as we see it inside. But I just wanted to make it clear with the different sections and parchments, we can see it clearer. All right. New share. Let's go back to our discourse here. Here we go. Okay. So now So now back to our Tanya. We're gonna have a much better sense of what the Alter Rebbe is saying here. So specifically, through putting on the tefillin, he should intend that the attribute of wisdom and understanding which are in his divine soul should be nullified and absorbed into the attributes of wisdom and understanding of the blessed Ein Sof. These being clothed in particular in the passages of the first two passages of Kadesh and Vahaya Ki Yiviacha. So when I put on tefillin, I realize that my soul is becoming totally nullified. The intellect of my soul is becoming totally nullified to the intellect of God. It's becoming a so to speak, a merkava, like a chariot that's totally nullified to the driver. And who is the driver in this sense? The driver, the rider, is the chachma and bina of God. God's intellect becomes the driver of my soul. So my soul's intellect becomes just totally nullified. It becomes a chariot, a car, a vehicle, shall we say, right? For the divine attributes. So in these passages, both are found in the tefillin, so God's wisdom and understanding are enclosed. Wisdom in the first and understanding in the second. Okay, as we explained above. By putting on tefillin, the individual's wisdom and understanding are absorbed in God's. And how does this find expression? What does that mean practically? That means to say that he should use his wisdom and understanding that are in his soul for God alone, only in pursuit of Torah and mitzvot for understanding godliness. And this is this is the truth of our godly soul, right? When we're using the wisdom of our godly soul, we are using it only for one purpose, and that is for knowing God in the world, which would include knowing Torah. And similarly, he should intend that the attribute of da'at, the third of the three components of seichel in his soul, the third intellect, which include both chesed, kindness, and gevura, fear and love in his heart, be nullified and absorbed into the higher knowledge, as I explained above. The da'at includes both. Da'at is how we take the information, right? Ultimately, Chassidus explains, right? The whole idea of the 10 sfirot is how we take an idea, something in thought, a concept, and then we feel it, then it becomes our reality, and then we do something about it, right? That's really the description of all of the 10 sfirot. So the whole idea is that we have an idea of God, and how do we make that real through the intellect level of da'at. And the first level of making it real is that we feel it. It becomes relevant to us. And so we have a love of God and we have an awe of God. And so that's the idea, the way that da'at now splits into the two. So fear and love in his heart, so he should be nullified and absorbed into the attribute of higher knowledge. So the attribute of da'at comprises kindness and severity, insofar as these attributes exist on the intellectual level. Moreover, as is explained in the end of chapter 3 in Tanya, the profound and involved meditation that characterizes the level of da'at actually creates love and fear. Okay? So basically, the faculty of da'at then should be nullified and absorbed into the attribute of higher knowledge, into da'at elyon. So when we are putting on the tefillin, we are now becoming totally nullified to God, to God's intellect, which basically means we are becoming totally and thoroughly a chariot, a vehicle for the divine knowledge. And this is an interesting halacha in tefillin itself. And that is that when one puts on tefillin, you're not allowed to have what's called hesech hada'at. You cannot remove your da'at from the tefillin. A person cannot start joking around in tefillin or acting in with frivolity. You could be happy in tefillin. You should be happy in tefillin, but not frivolous. No frivolities, and you have to always keep your mind on the tefillin. You have to, when you're wearing the tefillin, you always have, and that's why, boys are trained to put on tzitzit at a younger age. They're trained to daven, to pray, and all of that at a younger age. But tefillin they only put on once they start getting da'at. Da'at is that, that they can stay focused on the matter at hand, right? That's why we wait until they actually become bar mitzvahs, right before the bar mitzvah, to start training them in tefillin. Why not train them when they're younger? Because they lack the maturity to be able to stay focused on it. So the point here is that we are meant, when we are putting on the tefillin, to become totally nullified within the dat alyon, which comprises kindness and severity, and which is clothed in the passage of Shema and V'haya im Shemoah. So basically, we have these passages. Each of these passages represent a spiritual level above that are inside of the tefillin, and we become totally nullified to that attribute above through putting on the tefillin. Practically speaking, it's brought in the Code of Jewish Law that the Alter Rebbe now quotes. This accords with the statement in Shulchan Aruch that while putting on the tefillin, one should intend to make one's heart and mind subservient to God. Right? Putting it in very practical terms, that means that what we know, our knowledge is used to know God, to know the Torah, and our feelings are used to feel Hashem, to feel the presence of God. In this way, then, the divine soul as a whole, and its intellective and emotive faculties in particular, are affected by one's wearing tefillin. I would just like to add that, for the women in the group, the women might be wondering, so what am I supposed to do? Women don't put on tefillin. And first of all, that would be a very good question. It's a very good question to have. But it's brought, there's a discourse on the mitzvah of tefillin, and this the discourse on the mitzvah of tefillin basically explains that the Jewish people said to God that they want to study Torah day and night, but they can't. They just can't. They can't do it. They can't hack it. So what should they do instead? What should they do instead? So God says back to them, "I will give you the mitzvah of tefillin." And putting on the tefillin, it says if you have studied Torah day and night. So I think if a woman studies tefillin, she can focus on these elements when she studies the Torah, of thinking about the idea of becoming nullified to the divine chachma, bina, and dat through her Torah study. Because this is certainly something where a woman, although not required, this is a practice that women are engaged in. In some areas it is required, but to add that added intentionality that, that a man can have when he's putting on tefillin, a woman could have that intentionality when she studies Torah. Oh, okay. Now the Alter Rebbe is now going to move on to another amazing idea, another big meditation. We're getting in this chapter, in chapter 41, a lot of amazing meditations. So if you've ever said in prayers, there are different prayers that where you have, let me find a prayer book here. There are different prayers that you can say where we talk about having intentions of what are called bringing about spiritual unions. So every mitzvah that we do, in the language of Kabbalah, it's called a yichud. A yichud is God created a world, and in creating the world and investing himself in this world, he's created to some degree a world of fracture and division. For certainly, it's a world of fracture and division. We don't need any proof for that. And in that sense, God himself, through the process of bringing about this world, God himself also has, in a certain sense, in terms of the way God becomes manifested to bring about this world of fracture and division, God himself, there's fracture and division in God's name. And we have this in the words of our sages regarding the first two letters of God's name and the last two letters of God's name. We have with the story of Amalek, it says the name of Yud K, the Yud and the Hey of God's name are separated. And the rabbis commented that as long as Amalek is still around, God's name cannot be complete. What does it mean God's name is not complete? A name
That's Al Case Ka.
K.
The pasuk says Al Case Ka.
Right. So Yud K is concealed.
No, but you have Case, Chav Samach, and it's missing the Aleph. And then you have Ka.
Right. Thank you. Right. So it says that the Kisei is not Shalem. It says that the Kisei is not God's chair is not Shalem. But it's also brought, maybe not in Rashi, but it's brought elsewhere that God's name is not complete because it's just the Yud K, right?
Well, we bring the Yud K with the Vav K together in order to effectuate that energy.
Right. So what I want to talk about is before we bring the Yud K and the Vav K together, what are they? Right.
Olam Haba, Olam Haza, Shemayim Aretz.
Right. Separated. They're opposites and separate and disconnected. Right. So whenever we're saying a yichud, what I'm just bringing about, right? People hear about yichudim. I'm going a step before the yichudim. That would mean that there is in the left, see a name, and I want to explain this because it's a little problematic. You can't say that God is split in half, God forbid, right? That's right. So it takes a little bit of understanding. What are we talking about? A name, and we're saying that on that name, God will be one and his name will be one, right? Have you ever heard of that? Right? This Yomahu Yiyah Hashem Echad U'Shmo Echad. This is a very famous line in the prayers where Rosh Hashanah is coming up. We're going to be saying this prayer again. Part of the Aleinu, at the conclusion of the Aleinu. So what does it mean God will be one and his name will be one? What? So now God is not one? And let's say God is one, but his name isn't one? I'm not going to go into the whole thing, but the idea is that the idea of a name, Kabbalistically, is the way that God becomes expressed in the world. The way that God becomes expressed in the world. This is the idea of a name.
Our viewpoint. Our perspective.
Our perspective. Sure. Our perspective, right? So in that sense, there is a split, there is a fracture, because God's name is not totally accepted, understood, and embraced in the world. Every time we do a mitzvah, we're bringing that together. So in many sidurim, they have many different mitzvot that you perform, and you say what's called the l'shem yichud. I'm doing this, of course, because God said I should do the mitzvah, but there's a Kabbalistic intention, and in Chabad we have a l'shem yichud, really only one l'shem yichud in the whole prayer book. Other prayer books have several of them. But the author of the compiler of our prayer book decided, that was the Alter Rebbe, Rabbi Shneur Zalman, decided that one is enough, and it includes the rest of them. And this one we recite before the Baruch She'amar. We say in the Hebrew, L'shem yichud kudsha b'richu u'shchinte liyachta shem yudke b'vavke b'yichuda shalim b'shem kol Yisrael. Now in English, it's not going to help much, but I'm going to say it in English anyway. For the sake of the union of the Holy One, blessed be He, with His Shekhinah. Basically, we want to bring the Holy One, blessed be He, this level called Kudsha Brichu, together with His Shekhinah, which is basically to unite God's name of the Yud K and the Vav K, the two aspects of God's name that are presently bifurcated. We want to bring them together. We want to unite them in a perfect union, and we say B'Shem Kol Yisrael. So really all of this is a preface just to the end of that line, which is, why are we saying B'Shem Kol Yisrael? What does that mean? And that's what the Alter Rebbe is now going to help us understand.
You don't pray just for yourself.
Well, yeah, but here it's not even just a question of the prayer. It's an interesting thing. The Alter Rebbe is let's see what the Alter Rebbe says. Yet, in fact, the sages of blessed memory have said that a person should never separate himself from the community. Therefore, he should intend to unite and attach to him, blessed be he, the source of his divine soul, and in addition, the source of all of the souls of Israel. Okay? So basically, when we are uniting, the source of our soul is in a place, it has a name, it's called Knesset Yisrael. Have you ever gone to a synagogue called Knesset Israel? It's a common name for shuls, Knesset Israel. Basically, a Knessia, right? A Beit Knesset, a gathering of Yisrael, gathering of the Jewish people. Knesset Yisrael. It's a good name. What would you call a place of gathering in Greek? You would call it a synagogue, synagoga. Synagogue is from the Greek of gatherings, syna, to bring together, but spiritually, there's a spiritual level called Knesset Yisrael, which is the place where all of the souls of Israel are combined as one. And so if I am connecting the source of my soul with God, I should also be connecting the source of all of the souls of Israel with God. And so the Alter Rebbe says, therefore, he should intend to unite and attach to him, to attach to God, the source of my divine soul, and in addition, the source of the souls of all of Israel. This source is called the spirit of his mouth. It is also called by the name Shekhinah. So when we're talking about the divine presence is a spiritual level of godliness that comes down to dwell in our midst. But that place of Shekhinah is actually the place where the souls of Israel are sourced. So it's called Shekhinah because it dwells and clothes itself in all worlds, right? Like we know the Mishkan, the place of God's dwelling, is from the word Shochein or Shochein Ad, that he dwells forever. So this is the level of godliness that comes down and gives life to the entire world. It animates them and gives them existence. In addition, it is the Shekhinah which imbues him with the power of speech to utter his current words of Torah, or with the power of action to perform the commandments, the particular commandments. So basically, it is the power of the Shekhinah that becomes our source of, is connected with the level of what's called Peh.
It expresses itself through it gives us the energy for and expresses itself through what we say and do.
There you go. Exactly so, right? So so just as our mouth, right? Our mouth is the place at which who and what we are becomes expressed to the outside. So this level of Malchus, this source of the souls of Israel, is the place where godliness now becomes expressed into the world. So in this next meditation, a person's intention while performing Torah and mitzvot should be that his soul cleaves to God. So we're going to get a little bit into quantum entanglement. Quantum entanglement. Is anybody here a physicist? No, so I can speak freely. So,
But we might understand physics.
no, this is I've checked this out. I mean, no, this is I've read this. This is clearly what we know so far. So they speak about, there are a lot of quantum ideas coming up in the news, and so this concept of quantum entanglement, and this is not a new idea. It's decades old. What they found is that if they take, for instance, a photon, the smallest particle of light, they're able to split it in half, and then they will do experiments on it in one place, and the effects of those experiments will occur on the half a photon which is 20 miles away. I think they did these experiments in Sweden, if I'm not mistaken. So this was like, okay, in other words, there's a certain connection. This photon is becoming separated, but that separation has absolutely no impact on it.
From its other half.
On the other half. So if you poke one half, the other half becomes poked. Whatever the experiments were, of course, they were done on, microscopic subatomic levels, levels that we can't, we don't have the, we wouldn't really appreciate it. But the point is this is science. This wasn't, So that's called quantum entanglement. By the way, if you hear about quantum computing, what they're trying to do now, because right now you have energy running through a semiconductor, and the smaller you can get everything to become, the smaller the chips, the more power and the more computational power that can occur.
But it's still going in a straight line. It's
still going back and forth, right? It's still going back and forth, and it's got to travel. And there's still even though it's very, very fast, but it's still got to get from here to there. Whereas once you get to quantum computing, there is no here, there is no there.
Everywhere.
As I've said to some physicists that have made them ponder, I say quantum entanglement points out that space is imaginary. The Baal Shem Tov says that in a place, where a person's mind is, that's where he is. And so space is an illusion. Of course, it's a very powerful illusion, a very practical one. You have to contend with it, right? On our level. But there's a certain level. I mean, when you go up to higher levels of reality, space itself is not the constant that you might think. And certainly, getting back to our mimer, more importantly, imagine our soul as a photon that was separated from its source, from God above, right? And now it's down here. But for a photon, there is no such thing actually as separation. There's a perception. We assume that there's a separation. We think of it as being separated, but it is not separated at all. Even the way the soul is down here in this world, it's totally and absolutely connected with God. So the soul is really already one with God, like one unit, like one photon. It's split apart, but remains one. But the body conceals the unity of soul and God. But when we do a mitzvah, we are aligning the body, the physicality, and our perception with God's will. Through this, the soul and her source become united. You see, once we get the body aligned, once we get the body performing and doing God's will, now the soul can also become totally aligned with its source in a revealed way. So our sages have said a person should never separate himself from the community. Therefore, one's spiritual service also includes the goal of becoming one with all of the Jewish people. One achieves this through contemplating Knesset Yisrael, the source of all souls above. And there we are all one. There we are all united. So in other words, when we do a mitzvah, when we do a contemplation, we basically it's not, this isn't just a matter of doing of praying for everyone. That there we understand, right? We're praying on everyone's behalf. Even when we're asking for forgiveness, we're asking for forgiveness on everyone's behalf, right? But we're saying here, when I'm doing a mitzvah, I'm actually including everyone in that mitzvah. And this is a very powerful way to do a mitzvah, and thinking about all of the Jewish people who maybe are presently don't feel so connected. We realize that in truth they are connected. And when we do a mitzvah, we are touching the source of their soul. B'Shem Kol Yisrael. We're doing this in the name of all of Israel, that all of the souls are one at this point. So this source, the Shekhinah, is animating me, giving me the faculty of speech and action during the Torah, during the time of Torah and mitzvot. And through contemplating the oneness of the Jewish soul, this brings all of the souls of Israel to cleave to God. In a sense, we are all parts of the same photon. So all of these photons are connected. We are all one photon. We're all one, right? When it says that the Jewish people are supposed to be an or lagoyim, a light to the nations, we are one photon. We are literally one photon. So since doing a mitzvah, one is connecting a mitzvah and connecting his soul, and he is recognizing his soul as part of the whole. Therefore, he connects all of the souls with their source in Hashem, in God. So this is quite an amazing Kabbalistic concept. I mean, some of you have recited the L'Shem Yichud. Other Sidurim have a L'Shem Yichud for like every mitzvah, you know, for before putting on tefillin, before putting on a talit, Sfirat HaOmer, any mitzvah. So there's going to be a L'Shem Yichud. Does it say by the other ones? Does it say B'Shem Kol Yisrael? I don't remember. Does anybody know offhand?
I don't recall either. No.
If you look at in a Sephardic Siddur, Nusach Sfard, you're going to find whether it says. But it either way, it is. One can always do every mitzvah b'shem kol Yisrael. So any mitzvah that we're doing, we're uniting my soul, which is another amazing thing, that whenever I'm doing a mitzvah, it kind of connects back to a mitzvah that we did quite a while ago. We were talking about the mitzvah of loving our fellow as ourself, right? Having absolute love of our fellow like ourself, and how that is, in the words of Hillel, that's Kol HaTorah Kula. That's the entire Torah. The rest is a commentary. But here we see the idea that every mitzvah that we do, we are really meant to be not doing it for me, myself, but doing it at the source of all of the souls of Israel, and thus incorporating every single Jewish person. So we have the capacity to create through our mind and through our intentions. We have the ability to create a different reality in this world. We have the ability to create a reality where all of the Jewish people are connected with my mitzvah. And that becomes manifest in the world.
B'Shem Kol Yisrael.
There we go. B'Shem Kol Yisrael. There you go. So that seems to be part of the formula of doing a yichud, right? It's almost as if we want to combine, if we want to connect God's name, right? Because really, we're connecting what's called the Kudsha B'richu, which is the higher level of God, with the Shechinte, which is the Shechinte is the source of the souls of Israel. This lower level of Shechina is the source of the souls of Israel. So the only way that this lower level can receive the higher level is when the lower level is complete. How is the lower level complete? Because number one, as we discussed back when we did that discourse, when I love every Jew, when I accept the mitzvah of loving every Jew, I'm now bringing a completeness and a wholeness to this level of the Shekhinah. Now that the Shekhinah is whole and complete, it can receive the Kudsha Brichu, and I'm thus able to bring together the two seemingly split levels of the divine name, of the Yud-K and the Vav-K. In other words, but really here, the Rebbe isn't saying we do this through loving our fellow Jew, but it's implicit, right? In other words, because of it's not even that you love. Let me ask you a question. I mean, do you need to meditate every day that you love your children? You know, there's no such mitzvah, and it's not necessary, because even
they
when
don't give you the time.
What?
They don't give you the time or the quiet to do so.
I'm saying even to you always love your children, even when they drive you crazy. You love them, right? You love to be driven crazy by them. And in a sense, this level of Ahavat Yisrael is simply because we are one. And it's the awareness that we are totally one. And when we do the mitzvah, we do l'shem yichud, we do it b'shem kol Yisrael. So we make the source of the souls all one. We're doing the mitzvah for the sake of all of the souls of Israel. And in that sense, the source, which is the level of Shekhinah, becomes whole and complete. And thus it's able to unite with the Kudsha Berichu. And that's all part of L'Shem, Yichud, Kudsha, Berichu, U'Shechinte, that we're bringing together these levels of HaKadosh Baruch Hu and his Shekhinah. And they become one, but they can only become one when we embrace all of the souls of Israel, you see. Because if we decide that, but those guys that are driving me nuts, not them. No. Because if you're not one with them, then your conception of Shechinte is not complete and not whole. And if the level of the Shekhinah is not whole, it cannot correspond to the Kudsha Berichu, to the Holy One, blessed be He, that can only reside, as it says in the Zohar, Be'atar Shalim, in a place that is whole and complete. So this is all jam-packed into this little Yichud, as it's called, the understanding of the way we're bringing together the disparate spiritual parts to become totally unified through my performance of this mitzvah.
Yep.
So, a little esoteric.
But I've been working just on, and I think I've mentioned this before, a way that you can express it practically, which is we keep saying we want to get closer. We want to feel closer here. We want to feel closer to Him. We want to feel closer. And especially to Hashem. I want to feel closer to Hashem. Feel that spirituality. The problem is, how do you feel closer to something when you're not in a three-dimensional world? Because you're not talking about a three-dimensional world. You're talking about outside of our practical existence. So what does closer mean? In a three-dimensional world, you look, north, south, up, down, you get closer. And I think the answer was said by, I don't know if it was the Malbim or whatever, that it's by becoming more like the thing that you want to feel closer to. So in the case of Hashem, you're talking about you work more on being more Rachum. If Hashem is infinite Rachum, you want to try to feel closer to Hashem by being more Rachum. And these are the things that are expressed that we say on Yom Kippur especially. And now, Hashem, Kel, Rachum, V'chanun. And these are the expressions of Hashem that if we try to adopt those, we would feel, quote, closer to Hashem.
Beautiful. Okay. Any questions or comments?
I could say that you said when the kids drive you crazy, you love them driving you crazy. I think you love them because what they are, not because they drive you crazy.
No, I said you love them even when they're driving you crazy, you still love them.
Right.
I didn't say that you love that they're driving you crazy.
Okay.
high level, maybe a higher level of being. I'm not at that. I didn't say that. Right? They didn't drive me crazy. That would also be good.
And Baruch Hashem, we don't even appreciate it because we take it so for granted.
Oh.
Until 200 years ago, you got old, whatever you got, you went through life. What did you remember from your childhood? The idea that we have photographs, videos, things that we actually look at and can re-experience in a lot of ways those good feelings that we had when it happened is innate when you think about it. It's the thing that our grandparents didn't have this. To be able to get old and mellow out as you look at your accomplishments and work things out in your life, it's a tremendous thing that Hashem gave us to try to work that, whatever. That's all.
Beautiful
But
thought.
Isaac, now the older people are spending more time with the kids, and they get closer. You know,
Yes.
you work for so long, you know, work all day, work half a night, whatever it is, you're busy. But when you get older, that's when you get close to your kids.
And think of the blessings. When did a person sit down and have 30, 40 great grandchildren? These are numbers. I remember my father, before he passed away 12 years ago, says, who ever heard of living till 86? I'm already living longer than, my father, my great, the whole thing. And then my mother just passed away a few months ago at 92. We're getting the opportunity, we're getting the time to mellow out if we use it constructively. That's all.
Amen. I wish everyone a kasiva v'chasima tova. You should be written and inscribed for a year of health, of goodness, of divine blessing. It should be a sweet year, a zisen yard, and God willing, we'll see you next week.
Amen.
I wish you that all your wishes come true.
Amen. Amen.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you. נזכה לשנים רבות, נעימות וטובות, רבי.
תודה רבה. Thank you.
Thank you.
שנה טובה לכולם.